Welcome to the You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry podcast from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, John Martin Keith. Celebrities, working class musicians, and people who work behind the scenes in all areas of the music industry will share their stories, encourage you, and give practical advice of ways you can make a living doing what you love in the music industry. This episode is brought to you by Edenbrook Productions. Edenbrook Productions is the company I founded to help musicians grow in their craft. Are you a songwriter, but maybe you've been told your songs aren't quite there yet? Or are your songs ready, but you don't feel stage ready? Or maybe music is your passion, but you feel imprisoned by your day job and you don't know what to do next to make your dream a reality. Well, Edenbrook Productions is here to help. We offer consulting services via phone call, Skype, and FaceTime. And for the You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry podcast listeners, we're offering an introductory 1-hour consultation special. Click on the link in the show notes to contact me, and let's get you making a living in the music industry. Hey everyone, thank you so much for being with me today. This week is the end of season 10. Thank you guys so much for sticking around for another amazing season. It has been such a wonderful thing to get to be a part of your lives and have you guys be a part of mine and these conversations that we have with all these amazing guests. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of it. It's a true honor that you have been with me, and I pray that you will continue to go back and check out the old episodes from previous seasons and come back for season 5, which will be coming up in no time. So, all that said, today I'm going to end season 10 with a conversation with recording artist, producer, and songwriter Galen Crew here in Nashville. Galen's music is known for its dreamlike quality, which often features deep yet whimsical themes and seems to emanate from a different world. He is a huge fan of Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and other fantasy writers, and if you imagine the mysterious Grimm Brothers fairy tale collections being somehow transformed into modern pop songs, you'll start to get an idea of the imagery, depth, and layers within Galen's music. Although he's an American artist, Galen's music went viral in China a few years ago, and he's become a major pop star in that country. We are discussing writing music more like fairy tales and mainstream music, working with legendary songwriter Roger Cook, and building a huge fan base and touring in China as an independent artist. I hope you guys enjoy our conversation today, and get your pen and paper and get ready to take lots of great notes. Hey guys, I am sitting here talking with Galen Crew in Nashville, Tennessee. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing awesome. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for letting me come over to your studio. This is super cool. It's you explained it to me before we started recording, and tell me again for the audience to kind of put a picture in their head of what this place looks like.
It's a little bit like an English study. So I have like old maps on the walls and different, kind of.
Got the fireplace.
Yeah, there's a fireplace and old books from the sort of the Revolutionary War era, and an old clock and some pipes. So a little bit of that C.S. Lewis, Tolkien.
Yeah.
So it's because it's a little bit like an English study, I call it the studio.
The studio. That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, I love what you've done with the studio, and I love that in Nashville, I guess kind of everywhere nowadays, that we have home studios. You don't have to be in a giant recording studio down Music Row or, in LA or whatever so much these days. And you can make an amazing album that's a hit song, has hit songs on the radio and that kind of stuff. And we can just kind of build our own studios at home and be really creative and do a lot, and it's very at home feeling. It's just a great thing. So I love this, and thanks for letting me come over. So you and I got connected by a mutual friend named Philip Peters, who has been a guest on this show in the first season. He was on the show, and we had a great conversation, and we got finished. I always ask my guests, hey, can you refer 2 or 3 people to be on the show that you think would be a great guest on the show? And he immediately said you. And it took us a couple of years to finally get connected for whatever reason, but I'm glad we finally got to do it. So thanks for being on the show.
Oh, absolutely.
You had a really unique story about kind of the successes that you've had in music. And so I want to get into that. But first of all, tell us who you are, where you're from, what kind of got you into the music world to begin with, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I was born in Ocean City, New Jersey. And my parents moved us down to Franklin, Tennessee in 98. And so I was still a kid. So I really grew up in Franklin. I don't have a lot of, it was early childhood years in New Jersey, but I feel like a Franklin kid, you know? But I went to all the schools in Franklin and started kind of becoming interested in music. You know, being around Christian music had a big impact on me.
Sure.
Just being around the CCM world, and I got to meet like the guys in DC Talk when I was an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And that was big for me.
Sure.
You know, so I was always around that and feeling inspired by that. And I think that did push me a little bit to become interested in music myself. But it was around 11 or 12 when I started, you know, picking up a guitar and just becoming interested really in the writing, because I had played like clarinet before that, and it was just, it was a little, I had a natural ability, a natural affinity for music, but the guitar was what opened up the writing part of it for me, which was what made me interested, realizing it was the creativity and the outlet that I was interested in, music being that. I was pretty young when I started actually writing songs, but that was really the genesis of my own musical journey, and I haven't really looked back.
So when you moved down here and you got into music, what was it that made you start wanting to write songs?
Yeah, you know, the honest answer is when my parents got divorced.
Okay.
Because it was, obviously a negative thing, but I was looking for an emotional outlet, and the guitar was that. I'd come home from school and play guitar, you know, and so some of those, the first songs I wrote were a lot of that, like me processing what was happening to me and feeling like, you know, my world was kind of crashing a little bit, and just looking for a way to express that was healthy, which in hindsight was pretty good, you know, a pretty good outlet just to channel that through music. But even though negative circumstances brought that out of me, I was always interested in the hopeful sort of redemptive side of using music. You know, it wasn't like I was writing songs that were total downers, and just it wasn't a woe is me thing. It was more like processing what I was feeling and believing it's going to get better, and trying to communicate a sense of hope and like, you know, optimism through it. And that was, you know, something that was in its early raw stages when I was going through that as a kid, but I still have the same motivations now. Mm-hmm. You know, I can honestly say that, just using it to encourage people, using music as a tool. And so therein lies like the real motivation, I guess, is the impact, the deeper impact that like I would say I crave to experience, and music is my vehicle to do that, you know.
Yeah. So I know that you had played in some different bands growing up, and then at 19, that's kind of when your world started opening up a little bit more to start doing some different things. Tell us a little bit about where that age things kind of kicked in for you and sent you off on as a solo artist, really. Yeah,
no, that's exactly right. So I was playing in a band with a couple of my buddies in college, and we almost signed to Disney. So
really,
Disney was like flying us out to LA, and this was when the Jonas Brothers were kind of at their peak, and Disney was looking for like a follow-up kind of a band, a similar thing but slightly different. They were going to launch it through a movie, and we got caught up in all that, and it was exciting. It was my first serious brush with the music industry, I guess you could say. But through that process, I realized we wouldn't have had any say in the writing. It was like, you know, sing these songs and you're going to do this. And that showed me that I'm not just interested in being in a band or, you know, being in the music industry in these different ways where it's like more geared towards fame, I guess.
Sure.
I was interested in the creative part.
Okay, I want to back up for a second and let's talk about this, because listeners that are wanting to be artists and get signed, maybe they're in a band or a solo artist, whatever, and they want to get signed, and you know they would love to be on Disney, right?
Yeah.
So on their label. So can you explain how Disney found out about you? You found out about Disney. Like, how did that relationship come about for them to even offer you to sign you?
Yeah, so the lead singer of that band I was in, I actually wasn't the lead guy, which I'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
Well, I was kind of the guitarist, BGV guy in that band, and the lead singer had a connection he's one of the biggest songwriters for Disney. So this guy in LA has written some of like the, worked with the top artists in correlation with Disney and written some of the biggest songs in their movies and stuff. And so that guy was coming back and forth to Nashville and LA and knew my friend, Josh Castle, who was the lead singer of our band.
Okay.
And so that was the connection. And it was really cool. Getting flown out to LA and meeting all these, A&R guys who've worked with Michael Jackson and big time stuff.
Sure.
It was cool, like having meetings in their mansions and them saying, we're going to put you on tour with so-and-so if this goes well. And we're like, wow, this is crazy. At the same time, I had a little bit of that feeling of like, this is cool, but is it something that's going to last? Is this really what I want? And even as, I guess at that time I was 18, even at that time I was starting to ask those questions like, is this the long-term vision that I want to pursue? Mm-hmm. And I had a little bit of doubts and you're right. I mean, a lot of people that would be, would find themselves in those opportunities wouldn't really think twice about them. And it wasn't like, oh, I don't want to do this. It just more had that quiet feeling of, I'm not sure this is the real goal for me, the fame part.
Yeah.
And this was a quick door to that. It was like, if you want to be famous, this is it. You know? And so, I realized I actually quit that band after about a year.
Okay.
Just realizing I think what I want is to write my own songs and sing them. And it was a little scary for me because I wasn't the lead singer guy. I didn't feel like I had a great voice, and I've always struggled a little bit with just self-confidence vocally. Mm-hmm. So I've always had a lot more confidence on the writing side, just playing, musicianship, producing, but the vocal delivery, being the guy that was steering the ship live, that was so intimidating to me. And so I really felt like it was a calling, like God was directing me towards a different path. There was a little bit of that, like Moses thing, like, hey, I want you to go do this. And I was like, and Moses is like, I can't, I'm not good at speaking.
Right.
It was like me. I was like, I'm not that good of a singer, But I knew I wanted to write songs that had a little more substance than the kind of material I was writing in that band. So that's the decision I made.
Okay. Let me ask you this one thing about that band. How long, when you guys were talking with Disney, how long did that whole thing sort of play out before? Did the band ever get signed? Did Disney just decide they're not going to do it? Did you guys decide we're not going to do it? Like, how long did that whole thing sort of play out before a final decision was made either way?
Yeah, so it was all sort of contingent on this movie launch.
Okay.
And it kept getting pushed back. It was like in a stage of script rewrites while they were developing us to sort of line them up.
I see.
And the more it got pushed back, the more it seemed like, I guess this is all dependent on this movie coming together. It's just it felt like we were on this hinge of like, I don't know, do we need to drop out of school to do this? Do we stay in school? It was that kind of feeling.
Sure.
And so the longer that uncertainty went on, the more I started feeling like, I'm not sure I want to live waiting for this to come about.
Yeah, it's a scary thing.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The lack of control over your own sort of path was a little disconcerting for me. But
especially when it's writing on a movie, not on a music career necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's like this whole other contingency that it's stuck to.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so then you go out on your own and you're writing, and then you met a really big songwriter that had been very successful. Tell us who that is and kind of how did that relationship come about? Because when I read your bio and saw that, I was like, I want to teach the world to sing. That's the song. I was like, wait, what? Tell me about this.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories. So when I first started stepping out as a solo artist, it was scrappy. I mean, my songs weren't that good. I was learning how to sing, in my own voice, and it was weird. But I had put together a few demos, like of just original songs, and that was what I was kind of showing people to just get feedback, And so I'm 19, and my granddad, he's no longer with us, but my granddad was a jazz musician. He lived in Manhattan, and so he would fly back to Nashville and New York City to come visit family. And one time on a flight from New York to Nashville, he sat next to Roger Cook, who is one of the biggest songwriters of all time. I mean, the guy really is a legend. He's British. I think he's the only British songwriter in the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. I think that might be the case. He's had a ridiculous amount of number ones. He wrote "I'd Like to Teach the World to Sing," just crazy. And so Roger and my granddad are sat next to each other on this flight, and they're about the same age. They just totally hit it off. They're both goofy. It was immediate, just friendship. And so as they're kind of talking during this flight, at one point my granddad says, "Hey, I've got a grandson in Nashville who's, he's pretty talented. He's a young musician, just kind of breaking it in. You should meet him. I think that'd be really cool." And Roger has told me this story many times, and he told me at this point he was kind of internally,
it's like,
here we go. I've heard this before. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And but something about my granddad's word, even from that conversation they were having on this flight, Roger had enough of a sense of trust that this guy probably wasn't leading him terribly far astray,
Sure.
And so Roger, the next day, he showed up to my house, and I was still living with my parents. It was like, I think, a summer in between semesters, and Roger came over my house. I remember
just showed up.
Yeah. It was like my granddad said, "Hey, this guy, I sat next to this guy, Roger Cook, on a flight, and I think he's going to come over to meet you."
Okay.
And he was like, "Why don't you Google him?"
Okay.
And so I Googled him, and I was like, wow.
Nice.
Oh my goodness. And so in my position, this was the first time that, as a 19-year-old kid, just stepping out as a solo artist, that I feel like somebody had been coming to meet me. It wasn't in connection with the band. It was so early. So it was a big thing. I was really excited to meet him. And, so he came over, and he's the nicest guy ever. Roger is. I can't say enough good things about him. He's known for taking interest in younger musicians. He's really great about that. It's something I admire. And he has great instincts too. So he doesn't necessarily look for people's credentials. He'll just dive in and see if they have talent. And so I gave him those demos when he came over. It was like a CD of 3 or 4 songs, demos that I had pretty much done on my own, or not that great quality, but he took it and he said, "All right, I'll listen and I'll be in touch." And I think it was within a few days he called me and he said, "Hey, I've been listening to your demos, and there's something there. I hear something there, and would you like to write?" And I was like, "Yes."
Yeah. Yes, please.
And so he invited me over his house, and we started writing, and this has turned into the most fruitful collaboration and friendship of my whole life.
Yeah. I
mean, this guy, so just so people understand, he's older. I think he's 81 now. Okay. He has worked with, Paul McCartney, and he came out of England in the 60s when that whole, so that's where he comes from, and he's been successful in so many ways in every decade since then. Yeah. And so when we get together, I feel I've always been a big fan of like the Beatles, and I feel this really cool intergenerational like connection that happens when, even though our age is so different, he's the same age as my granddad was, but we feel like peers when we sit down to write, and his mind is incredible. Like, he's so prolific and sharp, really cool. I hope I'm like that at his age. But when we sit down to write, the age gap doesn't. It's almost like it disappears, and it just feels like we're creative peers, and we can go to places creatively that I can't go with anyone else. And sometimes we get a little too far out there and kind of have to reel it back in. But for my own artist journey, he has been my richest collaborator. We've written hundreds of songs together. We started writing in, I guess, around 2010, and we write every month now, and it's 2022. Yeah. I mean, it's a constant thing. My new album that I'm working on right now, it's about a dozen songs, and he's co-written every single one of them with me. So that was a big moment in my own journey of meeting Roger Cook and getting to write with Roger Cook, and it's opened up a lot of doors. The biggest one is probably a song we wrote called Sleepyhead, which was a fairy tale. Basically, we sit down and we love to write original fairy tales. It's kind of one of our favorite things to do. And I wrote this one with Roger and put it out as kind of like an acoustic master. Really, it was like an album of acoustic demos, and then we mastered it and put it out as an album. And that album is called Acoustic Daydreams. And I put it out, indie budget, no team, no marketing, no help, And after a few years, I found out that Sleepyhead had gone viral in China, which was the most random thing.
Yeah.
And but that was one of our Roger and I, our collaboration, just us having fun. And it's not a cool song. It's not one of those songs where you listen to it and you're like, wow, this is you're really cutting edge stuff here.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a very humble recording and kind of unassuming. But for whatever reason, it struck a chord in China, and they love the myths and legends. They'll sit there and analyze the lyrics, and the story is a cliffhanger, which I think really helped. But the crazy thing was, I didn't know that this was happening for like a couple of years. I started getting contacted by Chinese teenagers who, and for people that don't know, there's like a wall between our internets. So Chinese teenagers, like, they can't get on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, right, Spotify. Those are all blocked. Yeah. But they have their own Chinese platforms. So somebody had stolen my music and uploaded it, to these Chinese platforms without my knowledge.
Okay.
And then that song, and then subsequently some of my other songs had gone viral, but I didn't know. I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't seeing an uptick in followers on my US social media. So it was like it wasn't happening. It wasn't affecting my life at all. But then some of them were getting VPNs. The Chinese teenagers would get like VPNs and find me on Instagram. They'd be like, "Is this the real Galen Crew?" And I'm like, "Yes." What? And they were like, "Well, did you know that your song has more plays than Justin Bieber on this Chinese
really
website?"
Wow. That's awesome.
And I thought it was a joke.
Yeah.
Because I was just, indie artist guy in Nashville. There was nothing glam about my life.
Sure.
And so I thought it was not real. I was like, I have no grid for this. And it wasn't until somebody sent me a link, and then I looked at it, was millions of plays, and I was like, why am I not getting paid?
Yeah.
It was like this mixed feeling of, the excitement when you see the numbers, and then sort of
disappointment.
It's
like, oh, man.
Just like, wow. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I got to figure this out. What's going on? And I had a friend who named Bob Kilpatrick, who he was in California, and he had been to China with my good friend Phil Joel.
Phil Joel.
You know Phil?
I know Phil.
Such a good guy.
Yep.
Love Phil. And so, yeah, I know I'm kind of moving fast here.
No, you're good. Go for it.
But yeah, Bob Kilpatrick was like, well, something's happening here. Like, let's go to China. Let's show up and, I don't know, see if we can get a better idea of what's happening.
So to explain again, I may have missed it, but just in case, what is your relationship with Bob Kilpatrick?
Well, at that time, he was a friend through Phil Joel. I had toured with Phil Joel as an artist.
Oh, well, let's back up to that.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Explain it, because what I want the audience to know is I want them to hear the progression of, how you're working your way up through the industry as all this is unfolding.
Yeah.
So, before we get to the relationship with Bob, how do you know Joel, and how did you get the opportunity to tour with him?
Yeah. So there was a little period in there where the songs I was writing as an artist I was kind of telling these stories and using the fairy tale themes as kind of a C.S. Lewis mechanism, type mechanism for deeper spiritual truths.
Okay.
And I had some opportunities arise in the Christian music industry, and so there was multiple connections that came from that, and I almost kind of went more the CCM route for a second, but then realized that it wasn't quite the target that I was trying to hit, just from a creative standpoint. But in that time, there was a number of guys I got connected to just write with. And actually, I originally met Phil Joel through Roger. I was performing at a little venue in Franklin one night, just doing my solo stuff, and Roger came and he brought Phil with him because they're neighbors.
Okay,
and
that makes
they
sense.
live on the same street.
I gotcha.
And so he brought Phil Joel, and he knew. I had told Roger that I was a huge Newsboys fan growing up.
Yeah,
I mean, my childhood was full of Newsboys records,
Yeah.
And so obviously I was a huge fan of Phil already. But then Roger brought him to one of my shows, and I remember being in the middle of the song and kind of seeing him sit at a table, and I saw his long blonde hair, and I was like, I got pretty nervous. I was like, wow. And then I talked to him after, and he was like, hey man, I love your stuff. You want to write? And I was like, yes.
Yes, please. Yeah, that's cool.
And Phil has become one of my best friends. And so after that first time writing, we started working together in a lot of different capacities. So he actually had me produce some of his solo stuff.
Okay.
Which was really exciting for me. I produced his version of Entertaining Angels, which is a big Newsboys hit. And we did kind of a acoustic arrangement of it. So that was really cool. And during that time, he invited me on tour to open up for him.
Okay.
And so I was we were doing these just sort of weekend tours at churches and stuff all around the U.S. And I was opening for Phil and kind of tag teaming with him for his stuff. I'd accompany him.
Okay.
And that was a really, really cool thing. My first legitimate touring experience really was with Phil.
That's not a small thing either. As your first,
right? Your
first touring is with somebody from the Newsboys. That's a huge thing. So congratulations on being able to do that. To say that's your first touring opportunity, is with that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I got thrown in there a little bit, but Phil, he's awesome. I mean, he was really just encouraging to me, and just always like, hey, just go get him. You got it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was a big confidence boost, I think, for me to be out there with Phil and to watch him and learn from him, just how he carried himself.
Yeah. What would you say? I mean, this is just off the top of my head and putting you on the spot, but what would you say is like one of the biggest things that you learned in that moment of being out and opening up for Phil Joel, knowing the caliber of artist that he is and being part of the Newsboys and all that kind of stuff, a huge CCM artist, and you're thrown into this as an acoustic artist, right?
Yeah.
What's one of the biggest things that you learned in that process as an artist and as a touring performer that you may not have known before, that's something that the audience now would be like, oh, that's something that's valuable for me to know?
Well, from Phil, I would say probably the authenticity element, just authenticity. I know that's broad, but when you're touring with somebody, you're hanging out with them a lot. So you're those quiet moments when they're preparing for the show, they're thinking about it, to when they're actually on stage, to after the show when they're interacting with hundreds of people. I could see from him it wasn't a face he was putting on. Like, it wasn't like he switched to performance Phil when we did these gigs. This was the person that he was. Like the way he carried himself and interacted with me when we were just hanging out was the same as he would carry himself in front of a lot of people. And that authenticity thing, I think it does translate into performance. It translates into the way you talk to an audience and just the way you are coming off to people. And it's favorable. I think if the authenticity is there, it makes you more likable. I think it made me like Phil. Phil's a very likable guy, but it wasn't a face he was putting on. And so I thought that was a good. I think sometimes in music and it's sometimes high profile settings and gigs that we're doing, there is definitely a temptation to project things. You want to project something that is how you want people to be perceived. And for me, as a Enneagram Type 3, this is like the classic thing of caring too much how you're perceived. So a big lesson for me was to try to let go of that and just pursue the authenticity in myself, and not worry about as much what are they thinking of me, what am I projecting, and just try to get that vision of myself and the person I want to be and just be it, regardless. That really was a pretty profound shaping that happened in me during that time with him, I would say.
That's cool. And so moving forward, the relationship with Bob Kilpatrick, so they're friends, right?
Yeah.
And so what does Bob do?
Yeah, he's a songwriter, producer, speaker, author. He kind of does a lot of different things. And I didn't know him before this, but we got connected, and he was the guy who brought me to China for the first time. And so for a little while there, we had kind of a working relationship where he was helping me facilitate getting over to China because he'd done that with Phil. And very random, very, very just random, like, hey, let's kind of, it was very thrown together, but fun. I mean, it was a total adventure.
Yeah, so we talk about this on the show a lot, that everything in this business comes back to relationships. And everything that you have talked about up to this point comes down to relationships. And so I just can't emphasize that enough.
So true.
Right? You know, your grandfather met Roger on a plane, built a relationship with him, had him reach out to you. You guys built a relationship, started writing together, and then you got connected with Phil, and because they had a relationship, right? And then you and Phil created one together, and then now with Bob, and that's putting you over into China now, and so to go start touring. So, which is such a cool thing, but I just really can't emphasize that enough. People are probably sick of hearing it, but you can't say it too many times, can you?
No, absolutely. It's so true. It is so true, and to remember to value those relationships, like. We can be so, and I say this as somebody who's been guilty of it, just really goal-driven. The relationships are really what matters. And like you said, we can say it all the time, and it can even seem trite maybe to some people, but it's the truth. You valuing people and pursuing these just deep friendships with people, it leads to opportunities. And I don't even think we should value our relationships because it leads to opportunities.
Right.
It's more like just the journey is so rich because of the people that you meet along the way and the adventures you get to experience with them. So, it really, if you can have that shift in being less focused on the goals and just absolutely loving and cherishing the people around you that you have these friendships with, it makes every experience just that much better.
Sure.
When those doors do open.
Sure. Okay, so Bob gets you over into China to start touring because your songs have gone viral, huge over there, right?
Yeah.
So what does that look like? You're the first guest I've had on the show that not that other artists that I've had on haven't toured over in China, but that your specific focus has kind of shifted from being U.S. based to China based. We'll just say that for lack of a better term, because the fan base there is so huge for you. I mean, is that a legit thing to say?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does it look like to have such a huge fan base in China and to be able to tour over there so much, as opposed to doing it here in the U.S.?
It's a great question, and it's a very odd. It feels very strange. It feels like I have two different existences, two different lives, because it's kind of like the Hannah Montana thing, like like showing up somewhere else, just being like
it's
a different
Miley
person.
or Hannah, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like that. So when I first went over there, and there were all these people that showed up hours before my gig and knew not just the songs that had gone viral, but the deep cuts. Like, they were singing along to all the words. I had never experienced that before. Nothing close to it in the U.S. So, I mean, the best touring experience I had was with Phil. But even those, I'm the new artist that is trying to prove myself.
Sure.
So to go somewhere else and for them already to know me and know my songs, I never felt that before. It feels great. It feels great from a performance aspect, because you're not trying to prove yourself. You're not trying to earn their favor as much. But there was definitely like a mind fracture that happened to me, because on that first tour, like, my wife didn't go with me, and it was weirdly like lonely, because I just experienced this mountaintop amazing thing, but no one knew. Like, at least my main life here, my friends, the only way anybody knew this was happening was if I told them about it, I posted about it, if I kind of telegraphed it, that was the only way to be like, hey, this is actually happening. The divide, even on the internet, is that stark.
Yeah.
And
so you couldn't even post about it while you were over there, could you? Because of the block.
Yeah.
I would have to wait until you get home from touring to let people know about it.
Or I like text my wife like a picture, and then she'd log into my profiles, and I do a little of that. But yeah, there was plenty of stuff I didn't post till I got home because of all that.
And by then it's over.
Yeah, right. The moments have kind of passed, and every bit of this has been. I feel like it's a little bit of that Lewis and Clark, taking a machete through the woods. Like, I don't. This is new territory. I don't know who has modeled this that I can kind of look to. Mm-hmm. It is definitely that pioneer feeling, and I've learned to be a little more comfortable with the messiness of that, because you can beat yourself up with that feeling of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but. It's fun. It's fun, and there's just been a learning curve constantly with me trying to figure this out, and some frustration, because, I mean, just to be totally transparent, it's frustrating to me that my followers over there, like, that it's not visible here. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's
sure.
So from a sort of my flesh and my ego would love for the numbers I have in China to be visible here in the U.S.
Yeah.
From a following standpoint, as I said, there hasn't been a huge uptick on the profiles where people here in Nashville or just in the U.S. in general go to evaluate somebody's audience and see the scale of it. Mm-hmm. You can't see it unless you go to these Chinese sites. Now, if you go to Nettie's Music, you can see my audience there. But unless you know what that is, you won't know that this is happening.
Sure.
And yeah.
So when you're releasing new music now or over the past few years, and at this point you've created a following and you have a fan base over there. So when you put out new music from that moment forward up to now, do you put music out specifically for them? Like that, is that audience your main audience? And when you release music, do you specifically release it to their platforms first over US, because that's where your main fan base is?
Yes, to an extent. So now I have a good relationship with Nettie's Music in China. So they're kind of like the sort of Spotify equivalent. No affiliation with Spotify.
Sure.
It's like their equivalent.
Their version of it.
Yeah. And so in China, I definitely, now when I create, I'm mindful that really where people are going to care about this music I'm making is over there. Mm-hmm. So I've had to totally pivot like my attention on to be based on Chinese social media sites to post there more. And it does factor into my material creatively. And sometimes I just wrote a song in Chinese. And
really?
I had a lot of help, and I'm not fluent in Chinese. I only speak a little bit, but that was totally for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I knew people here are not going to care about that. They, some people might be like, "Oh, that's cool, that's interesting," but it was totally for them. And so, they have shifted to be my number one like priority as far as the reach and the focus, because they're the ones that they get me.
Yeah,
they get what I'm trying to do artistically. The whole, using fairy tales and symbolism and metaphor and talking about myths and legends, but being a singer-songwriter who sometimes has these, different sort of spiritual elements, but they're not, like in your face. It's like,
sure.
It's just kind of anybody can listen to it. That whole aesthetic, they get it, and they're all about it. And it feels great as an artist to be validated in that way. So it's natural for you to gravitate towards the people that are receiving you so positively, and want to just keep giving them more songs to enjoy and stuff. And it's, at this point, it's a really special connection. I love them. I love going there and just connecting with the people there, and it's a beautiful thing. I feel lucky that it's become a part of my story, as difficult and confusing as it's been. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, it's such a unique thing. It's more interesting than what most artists experience. It's such an interesting dynamic that you've got doing that, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around, what that looks like and how that works, because it's so unique in the way that you've experienced that. So I know that. So earlier you were saying that you were having such you kind of this division of, man, it's great, I got all these numbers over there, but and all these listeners now, but I'm not really making any money from it, right?
Yeah.
So since that, now that you're an established artist in that country, and you've got the platforms over there to put music out nowadays, are you seeing income from that? Like,
yes.
Has that kind of remedied itself to some degree?
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
What they pay, like their streaming payouts, are still nothing like even the U.S. platforms.
Well, the U.S. is nothing.
Exactly. So it's like fractions of
nothing, right?
So even if you get, at this point, I think, I'm over like 300 million plays over there, but that doesn't equate to the revenue that it would here.
Yeah.
So it's not like a perfect.
Sure.
But at the same time, I have a much better relationship with these Chinese streaming companies, and there's some people over there. There's a guy named Matthew Daniel who he's the VP of NetEase, and he's doing a really good job, like trying to legitimize these things, like and legitimize relationships with Western indie artists that have had this similar things happen. There's a few other people kind of like me that are indie artists here, but then had this popular song in China, and so it feels like it's going in a good direction. So where it is now is certainly better than where it was when this first happened to me. And so that is encouraging. I think it's getting better and better. I really feel the most, I was touring there. My last tour was in 2019, right before the pandemic. And that when I go there and, do the tours and put more music out, I can start to feel some of the positive effects from it and stuff. So it's getting better and better. But as I said, I'm learning how to maximize it in real time, because it's such a new and like wild thing. And so, but yeah, I'd say it's going well and getting better and better, and I'm grateful.
When you're touring over there, so Bob helped you with the first one. Does he still kind of book you now for all that?
Not
stuff?
anymore. Just the first two that we did.
Okay,
he helped.
So
me
are you booking your own tours now, or does someone else do that for you?
Well, the last go, obviously I haven't been there since 2019, just through global circumstances. Yeah. But I worked with a guy, a mutual friend of ours, Charles Soros. He helped me in the States to kind of put that together, and then there was a company in China that I worked with that was that I hadn't worked with before, and they were awesome. They were very professional, and so my 2019 tour was a great experience, and just a little less sort of thrown together than the first. Now the first two were fun. It was the nature of it was a little scrappy, and it was great. You know? But the third one was a little more legitimate, and so I hope the next time I go back, whenever that becomes possible, that'll continue to be the case. And it's a building thing. It's that's how I look at it. Like each one, I'm hoping is just getting a little better and a little more legitimized than the previous ones. The first time was like I just showed up and we booked a few gigs at these random. It was like some clubs and then a university and then and just gauging, is anyone going to show up? I don't know, But the thing, and for anybody listening, like I guess there's a lot I've learned about just being okay with where you're at, and when you have those gigs where it's like sometimes that expectation we set things up like is what fosters that disappointment in us if we're expecting things to just be amazing right away, or just like be okay with the building aspect of it and valuing it. That's what I've kind of learned on those first couple tours. I think once I realized I had a big song in China, I think I built up some of the expectation of what that was going to feel like, and it was totally different every step of the way than how you would think.
Sure.
And so just being open and flexible enough to just value what you're seeing happen in front of you if something is going on, and just kind of going with it and riding those waves without thinking it should be like this, or it was like this in my mind and this is different.
Yeah.
Just, let go of that.
It's rarely what you think it's going to be in your mind.
Totally.
Yeah. no matter where China doesn't matter. Anywhere you go when you're trying to do this as an artist, and especially the touring life, it never hardly ever turns out the way that you think it's going to.
Right.
Yeah. And most of the time it ends up being a better thing than you thought it would be. Sometimes it's worse, but rarely is it exactly what you thought, regardless of if it's good or bad,
Right.
I always have these things. I don't know if you do this, or people listening, if you guys do this, but I picture some experience or a place. Like I'm going to go to this place that I've got coming up, and I think of what it looks like in my head, in my mind, what I picture what it is, and then when I get there, it's like completely different. I was like, that is not what I was expecting, right?
Yeah.
It's way cooler, usually, but it's never what I thought it was going to be, hardly, and that's just for whatever reason, that's what we do as people. Let's talk a little bit about producing, because you produce indie artists a lot, and you've worked with Centricity Music, right?
Yeah.
Which our friend Chad Segura, a mutual friend, has been on the show to talk about publishing and different things like that a couple seasons back. And then you said that you've produced for Phil Joel a little bit, and so let's talk about that for a minute, because at 19-ish, you're starting out as a songwriter, and you're starting to write with Roger, right? And you weren't really. You said you had produced a demo, right? But wasn't that great?
No.
But just something to kind of get started,
Right?
So once you're writing with Roger, at what point do you feel like, okay, I'm going to start producing? And when do you feel like, okay, I'm starting to understand what producing is, and I'm getting better at it to the point that I'm going to start producing other artists? And then on top of that, how do you go about getting artists to find you, to want to have you produce them?
Yeah. Well, early on, I was working with several different producers, just learning and working on my artist stuff, because I didn't have the means to record myself at the very beginning.
Yeah.
But some of those experiences of working with those other successful producers, you absorb and learn and watch, and so eventually I felt just enough confidence that maybe I at least want to get my own setup, like just get an interface and a DAW and monitors, and just start experimenting. Because before that, I was just putting little ideas down on like GarageBand on a laptop.
Yeah.
And actually, Sleepyhead, I started that way. I put down the ideas there, so it started out really modest. But my first studio was at my mom and stepdad's house, and it was like a downstairs room that they let me use. And so it was modest, and I started producing my own stuff and just learning that way, kind of, mostly with my own stuff. But then I had a few buddies that were in similar stages and maybe didn't have the budgets to hire bigger producers, but had heard some things I'd done and knew me as a musician, had enough trust that they felt like, hey, you know, could I record some of my stuff with you? And there was that happened pretty quickly, actually, after me getting just a simple setup and learning how to use it. I had buddies just coming over to record their own stuff, and one thing led to another, and it was pretty soon after that I was recording with Phil and helping him with his stuff. And so it's been a pretty organic thing that way. I haven't like advertised or promoted myself as a producer very much. It's all been word of mouth and relationships, as we've talked about. But at this point, most of my time, in all honesty, is producing. And I love serving. I love being that guy that helps an artist's vision come to life. Being an artist myself has really helped me. I know how artists think and feel. In a lot of ways, though, I think I'm wired more like a producer. I'm not as a lot of artists are more like, I guess, emotional, or like which is great because all that emotion gets channeled into their music. I'm a little more of the sort of conductor, the director on the set, kind of a wiring.
Yeah, me too.
And so, unfortunately for the guys I was in that band with, that I was not fun to be in a band with. I think I was pretty controlling, and pretty probably bossy with like arrangements because I really cared about that stuff and very perfectionistic with that delivery. But as a producer, it's been great. I feel like that's where I've found my sweet spot, just being in the studio with other creative people. And it's been just a slow, steady build of people. You produce one thing for somebody, it turns out well, it sounds good, other people hear it, hey, who produced that? And and then they come to me, and if it's like a good fit, we do stuff. And I've been working on a lot of different kinds of music too. Like, I'd say it's mostly singer-songwriter type stuff, but then lots of Christian music, some country, and it's been kind of a wide range, and I love it. It's probably my favorite thing to do, just be in the studio with other musicians.
Sure. Are you working mostly with indie artists? Or are you doing some labeled artists, or kind of a mixture of both, or how's that work for you?
Yeah, mixture of both. You had mentioned the Centricity guys. John Mays is a good friend, and I've worked with him and Matt at Centricity and done some stuff for Word. Predominantly independent artists, though.
Okay.
Those I love working with labels and stuff, but most of my day to day ends up being the indie artists that are just, it's like the artist and the producer, and you're the ones working on it, and I'd say mostly that's what I've been doing, and and then producing my own stuff. Like I said, it feeds into that. I don't know, just that understanding of artists and what is most meaningful to them. And I've found, being self-employed, there you can definitely be focused on, I just want to get the projects and get the, as many as possible. But the real substance there is in switching from that, like acquiring the projects, to being generous to them. I think in how you serve their vision and feel like, wow, when I want artists to feel like when they come to me in that tender, vulnerable place of trying to capture their sound and their songs, of like, wow, I really trust Galen. Like he cares about this and has the tools and the ability to realize this vision. And so having that mindset of serving artists and caring about them as people, I think is an asset when it comes to like your career. And again, not doing that because it helps you get more gigs, but because that's right. That's part of the integrity of the position of a producer. I had worked with some producers in the beginning of my journey who it made me feel it was more transactional when I was on the artist side of it, where I was just kind of a gig for them, more or less. And it's not a great feeling as an artist where you're like, they just want to get this done. so they can move on to the next thing, versus the other producers I'd worked with who I felt really valued me and wanted to, wanted to work with me based on that value or whatever. And so that's what I try to model and kind of how I view artists and how I treat them.
Yeah. So when you're working with an artist, this is an opportunity to give you a plug if you want it. So how much do you typically charge for a project, like an acoustic project, or maybe a demo versus a full band project? If somebody wants to hire you to produce their album or EP or whatever, like, how do you have like a specific way that's set up?
Yeah, well, it is. The honest answer is it depends, and I'm sure. Other producers can kind of relate to that somewhat. What the process will need to be to realize their vision is different every time. So there is a little bit of fluctuation in rates. If it's like a demo, usually $500 for a demo.
Okay.
But then,
so like a piano vocal, guitar vocal, or is that a
if
full
it's
band?
just a guitar vocal, I might do a little less than 500. Is kind of like there's some other elements on there to make a good demo.
Sure.
But then for a master, usually $1,500 for like indie. Are we talking indie artists?
Sure.
Kind of thing? Like, yeah. So kind of around that range, and then I might mix it too, which would be a little more.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, in all honesty, the mixing process has merged more and more for me.
Yeah.
With the production
process.
process.
That's the way it is for me too.
So, and I like that. I find myself I mix as I go now. And so, I don't know if that answers your question. It really depends. Like, sometimes I'll do stuff for less, and sometimes it's more if what's required to get that result that's expected is going to require more time and effort for me. But that's kind of I'd say the range.
Average,
Yeah.
Do you have a specific genre that you lend yourself to more than others, that you prefer to produce if you have the option?
Yeah, probably like the indie pop stuff.
Okay.
Like indie pop singer-songwriters. And some of that stuff is like Christian indie singer-songwriters, and some of it's just straight up, indie singer-songwriter. I love that sort of folky acoustic pop kind of realm.
Yeah.
That's really where my head is at.
That's kind of where your music is.
Yeah,
it's like, to some degree at least.
Sure, absolutely.
Your music, when I've listened to it, is very interesting, especially with, like, you're talking about the sort of the fairy tale aspect of it, the myth and legend type kind of thing. It was really interesting. It reminded me a little bit of Andrew Peterson.
I don't know
if you've been compared to him before.
I have heard that, and I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, it's a huge compliment. I like him a lot. Yeah, because he's very, very storyteller kind of guy in that sort of realm. And he's an author, and he writes kind of fantasy type stuff as well. And
yes.
So that would make sense to me. I heard that and I thought, I could see that sort of being a cousin of sorts to Andrew Peterson type stuff. So
I appreciate that. And I'm working on a new album right now. And it's all my concept for it is totally this. It's like, what a troubadour is, the troubadours were in the Middle Ages. They're just like, traveling musicians. And a lot of times they were knights as well. So they're kind of these warrior poet types. And they would sing in the taverns in Europe or get hired to perform in the king's court or whatever, and they would sing these songs about battles and war, or it would be like romantic poetry, and there'd be like allegory in there. It was it was usually one of those things that they would sing about. And so my vision right now for this new album I'm working on is, if you took a troubadour out of the Middle Ages and put him in 2022, what would he sound like? What would that sound? What would it feel like? And so I do like, it's kind of nerdy, but I do like that sort of fantasy. It's like people that love to read fantasy novels.
Yep.
Will like this.
Sure.
And will get it, but it is nerdier than your just typical like pop stuff. It's a little,
Yeah.
you know, I like it because I love to be taken somewhere or listen to a song and feel like I just watched a movie or something, a real visual story, you know, kind of stuff. And so that's what I'm trying to do. It's definitely a specific kind of a
it's
thing.
not radio single material.
Not at all.
But it's high concept type stuff, you know,
Sure.
which is cool. It's got definitely has its place. you
Yeah.
know, so that's really cool. Well, man, this has been great getting to know you and hear your story. And I appreciate you telling us your story and all this really cool stuff. As we close up, is there you've been giving some really great advice. Is there anything specific that you would share with the audience, you know, people wanting to do either as an artist, as a songwriter, getting into that or kind of continuing that journey, or as a producer? You know, what are some things that you would recommend people do that want to be successful in this? You know, maybe some things to avoid. Maybe, you know, I'd stay away from this, but you might want to kind of go this direction, you know, those types of things.
Yeah. I would say don't look to the industry to give you your identity. Like, so some of the, you know, gatekeepers on whatever part of it you're pursuing, don't look to them to give you your identity, as if when you get to a certain mark or a certain opportunity, then you'll have your identity in this sphere.
Sure.
You have to have that going in.
Absolutely. That's great.
And how you get that, you know, is probably a bigger conversation for another time, but that is a huge factor in how you communicate to people, how people end up, you know, just perceiving you and what you're about. Having that identity and security in yourself and not looking to get it from these people that you're going to come into contact with is huge.
Yeah.
I would say that, and then from a more practical standpoint, just the like diversification of what you do, like spinning a lot of plates, and I think is really good. For me, at least, that's been a pretty good part of my own journey, and like
multiple streams of
income. Like, and if I'm feeling particularly dry for my own artist stuff, you know, I'm still producing and mixing for other people, or I'm writing for other people, or if that were to slow down, I still have the, you know, these other aspects of, you know, and I do session stuff too. Like, people will hire me to play, you know, the guitar or something on their stuff. And so just having different aspects of it, I think, is really good. Being, that's just good life advice anyway. Just the diversification of skill set is really good. I would say that, but certainly secondary to the identity piece.
Yeah. I think that's such an important thing, and I appreciate you saying that about the knowing who you are going into a situation. Don't let the gatekeepers, quote unquote, tell you who to be, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to create their own image of what they think that you should be. And I think most artists that do that, who let someone else kind of create the image of who you are as an artist, that's when you end up failing the most. I think more artists are less successful going that route. Not always, but, you know, I think a large chunk of the time that's probably the case. Whereas when you know who you are as an artist, who you are as a person, and then you walk in, and I think that the gatekeepers, label heads and publishers and everything, if you know who you are going into those situations, they have more respect for you.
Yeah.
You know,
sure.
And they'll give you more leeway because they can see, oh, okay, this guy or this girl knows what they're about, and they know what they want to write about. They know who they are. And I think that there's a stronger relationship that can be built based off of that. Yeah. You know, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That's well put. And, you know, if you think about it, when these relationships come about, it's a lot more positive when the relationships are based in authenticity. Like, if somebody wants to work with you because of something you're doing, something you're bringing to the table, how much better is it if that's because what you're bringing is authentic? It's you're being yourself and the kind of person you want to be, rather than somebody wanting to work with you based on a projection or or something you're trying to be but aren't really.
Right. You're bringing value to them and what they're trying to accomplish already.
Yeah.
As opposed to them trying to create value from you.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you get little bits of success along the way, if that success is based in it's coming out of the natural flow of your identity and who you are, it's so much more rewarding than if that success were to come on the heels of just, I don't know, something that's not authentic. It's just way better. Your relationships are going to be richer. And I think it's an all-around win. You don't, and this really, it's like the college age, at least for me, when this started to click, college, early 20s, kind of in there. And that's kind of what I tell people, because they're looking for someone to give them that opportunity or that door that then grants this identity that they can feel secure in. And that's not how it works. You have to get that first, and then let your train, be moving. And then as you're going through life, you'll have these other people in the industry and friends that come alongside you. And I like what you're doing. I like what you're about. And that's awesome. Yeah. That's a really fun way to go through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, man, thank you so much for sharing all of this. This has been great. Tell people your website and how they can get in touch with you if they want to check out your socials and all that kind of stuff. Where do they do that?
So my name's Galen Crew, GALENCREW. I'm on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff, YouTube, Spotify.
Over in China?
And now in China, NetEase Music. So yeah, check out my page on NetEase Music and Weibo, which Weibo is kind of like Chinese version of sort of a Twitter, Facebook hybrid, and NetEase Music is like a Spotify, YouTube kind of a hybrid.
How would you spell those?
So NetEase Music is NETEASE.
Okay.
But I think the website is like music.163.com.
Okay.
And if you go to that, and then you can search my name of the time. Now it's all in Chinese, but you can kind of see like the different. It functions similarly to other platforms. But you search my name there, you can see my profile there, and I think that's about it. Did I cover all the?
I think you got it all.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, man, thank you again for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks. All right, guys, there you have it. I hope you had a great time listening to our conversation today. I hope you take what we've talked about today and find ways to apply it to your career as well. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to it on. And please share it with all of your friends so that we can continue to get this message out to everyone around the world. Remember, Edenbrook Productions is here to help if you need consulting services via phone, Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime. Let us know how we can help you begin to make a living in the music industry.